Hey there, friends and enemies, JoPa here again, and today I want to talk about whether or not Explorer Mode should come to raids in Destiny 2, as we've seen a lot of success with the Rite of the Nine event and Explorer Mode in some older dungeons. But would that same thing apply for raids as well, and is it something that Bungie should consider? I understand there are several different things to think about with this situation, right? You want players to have that sense of mystery, to go in, learn the mechanics together. I don't feel like any new raid or dungeon should ever have an Explorer Mode option personally. I do feel like this is something that should be reserved for older dungeons and maybe even raids as well, even if they just do it for events like the Rite of the Nine. We saw other iterations of them changing up the raid formula as well in the past, which I feel like works well, and I do think this is something that absolutely should be considered. The pros are that more people will get into raiding in the long term, and this has been something that has separated the Destiny community quite a bit. There are folks who have never touched a dungeon or a raid, and now with the Rite of the Nine are able to jump into dungeons not only solo but also match made with a crew as they get guided through the various dungeons that are available. And this has helped a lot of people. I know I've seen on the timeline and in my comments and also just playing with people in the game, a lot of folks saying that they've completed their very first dungeon. They've completed their first dungeon solo and now are encouraged to complete it on regular or higher difficulty options solo as well, as they learn the mechanics, as they understand that they can do this. I think that's something that is a bit underrated. Oftentimes, the most daunting part about taking on new raids and dungeons is stepping in the first place, is taking that first step towards completion. And not only that, but finding a crew can be incredibly difficult for folks who don't have a dedicated team to take on this content. And I feel like this is where the Explorer Mode could come in handy in raids. Imagine a match-made raid with easier mechanics. Yes, you're not learning the full thing, but it's a stepping stone. It allows you to see the different locations within the raid, take on the various encounters, the different bosses, learn the mechanics at your own pace and not really feel pushed to do it. Now, this would be rather difficult to do solo compared to a dungeon. Soloing a raid is a completely different story. However, they could have a Explorer Mode match-made activity that is the raid, which would allow players to jump in and experience it for the first time and really get to understand the raids. And I feel like not only would this be beneficial for the higher player base, and I'll explain why in a little bit, but especially the lower player base, the more casual players who don't get to experience these pieces of content. Because in my opinion, dungeons and raids are the best content that Destiny has almost ever produced. And the fact that they are inaccessible to certain players does feel a little bit bad. It feels like they are missing out on some of the coolest experiences in the game. And if you give them an Explorer Mode option, maybe eventually those are players who will continue to raid in the future, and next time a new raid comes out, they will feel comfortable and confident enough to tackle it on either day one or week one, and really feel like they don't need to learn the mechanics in that same way because they have made progress over the course of time. That's something that, again, with a game as old as Destiny, it's hard to get new players into old activities, but it's also hard to get experienced players into old activities. However, if your friends who don't raid or don't play dungeons are now encouraged to try them out, you might be more willing and more patient to teach them how the dungeon or the raid works while you are in Explorer Mode, while you are match-made, while a lot of people are learning, but you can still make progress pretty easily. Your team's not going to wipe. So I think the overall Explorer Mode for raids, even if it's just a short-term event like the Rite of the Nine, would be largely beneficial, especially with old raids that only see play when they are the weekly rotator. You talk about Last Wish, raids like that I feel like could definitely be learned if people put in the time. Plus, then maybe we would finally have players learning and understanding how to complete it normally without cheesing the encounters. And I think, again, that is another thing where that would be massively beneficial to the wider player base, especially when you consider players trying to jump into these activities through the in-game Fireteam Finder now and having not a lot of success. If everyone kind of understands the mechanics and how to do these activities, I do feel like that would be beneficial. Now, some players at the top might gatekeep and say this is not something that we ever want to see, just because they want it to be difficult content for a reason and everyone needs to struggle like they did, whatever the case may be. But I think the fact that we would potentially have more people to raid with, more people to take on this hard content, maybe people who go from just doing an explorer raid or dungeon into maybe contending and doing low man activities eventually as they work their way up, would be beneficial to the scene as a whole. And for an aging game like Destiny, like I mentioned, I think we need as many players still playing as possible in order to keep the game pushing forward. If Bungie sees that they have a lot of folks tackling these raids and dungeons, the chances are we're more likely to have new content of that nature coming out in the future, and then put a lot of resources into developing that as well. So I do feel like that is a win-win for everybody, and I would personally love to see Explorer Mode come to raids eventually. I don't think it should come to any of the new raids when they first drop. Obviously, as I said earlier, I also don't feel like it should be right away. Like, I don't think it should drop 2-3 weeks later. 6 months or a year after a raid drops, I feel like would be the perfect time to maybe look at something like a Explorer Mode, or even, like I said, it looks like we're going to get these end-of-year events before the next DLC. So sometime around this time of the year in May or June before the July expansion would make a lot of sense when it comes to releasing this content, because it is normally a dry spell. It's normally when the community doesn't have any content to look forward to. And again, this would allow players something to do if they have never done this. Plus, you have the advanced difficulty mode for the Rite of the Nine, which has its own triumphs and everything accompanied by it. You've got new weapons to chase. So I feel like that's where this is a win for everybody. The Rite of the Nine is an absolute W in my personal opinion, and I hope we get more types of events like this, especially if it's only going to be once a year. Maybe it's dungeons, maybe it's raids, maybe we get it a little bit more often, twice a year, during the free airs when we are getting those large free updates in between DLC. Could also be nice, but either way, I feel like Explorer Mode raids would be a nice addition to Destiny 2 in the future, and they would help a lot more people potentially jump into raids for the very first time. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Like the video as always, comment, subscribe, have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.